You want to start, or I?
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I just had a question for everyone, for both of us, for both of you. It's interesting what we don't see at first, and then we realize that we have overlooked a lot of things, or blind to a lot of things. And I'm wondering if, you weren't thinking that the obituaries were one-sided until someone pointed it out. Are there other things, that was really interesting to me, that you were blind to it and then someone pointed it out and it was a glaring difference? Did you find that in architecture, that there's certain things you were blind to at first, and then when you started to dig deeper, you saw some discrepancies?
Yeah, I think, one thing that sort of struck me, and also looking at hearing your story and looking at your images and the word morgue, just thinking about the research side of it. And, it is a very solitary pursuit in a way. And at times, sort of questioning, am I seeing this? Is this really real? And then trying to check that. I think this goes back to some of our, before we came up here, we had a little bit of a conversation about the research and the kind of burden of proof. And so I think that is something for me that's always been a little bit challenging in finding that, and is this really accurate, and kind of checking it against things that have already been written. And sort of, I think, for instance, the images about Natalie Dubois in this very small, very personal album was really revealing, because there was no text associated with it. So to even confirm that that was her, for instance, was a kind of process, because the project she had worked on would have been published without her image next to it, right? So sort of to sync that up is an interesting, kind of process to not give up in a way.
Yeah, in my case, I really was I was one of two women on the obituaries team and the only person of color when I joined in 2017. So it's a team of about a dozen people. So to me, once I realized, it wasn't long before I realized it, and the issue of diversity came to me really early on. I started in January of 2017, and I was already thinking about things probably that month or in February of what I could do. But it really was kind of disappointing that answer about people not being invited to the table was just the standard answer of the whole desk. And they would say, oh yeah, we just get those emails sometimes. And nobody had really put more thought into it. So, it really, unfortunately, sort of fell on me. I had colleagues who were saying, thank goodness you're there. Finally, there's a woman, there's a person of color on the team. So I felt a little tokenized, but at the same time, I cared a lot. So I said, fine, tokenize me. I don't care. I really want to get something done. So.
Yeah, when I realized that the system was rigged, I started saying lots of things. Sometimes it was too many things, right? I was like picking apart everything. And in my family, that can be quite annoying when someone all of a sudden has this new idea. And so it made me keenly aware of things, but also put space between me and other adults. And so not so much my children, but it created conflict with adults, because what I was seeing was that we would make these contracts as adults. I had made these contracts with other adults, like say my husband. And once my eyes were open, I didn't want to live under that contract anymore. I was a different person. I was thinking a lot about the women who came before me. So I have a grandmother who used to be the breadwinner of the family. And because her husband, who was a black man, wasn't able to have work, he wasn't able to be around white people, generally speaking, so it was hard for black men to find work. And so she would make all the money, and then before coming home, she would go to the basketball courts in Harlem and shoot baskets. And she was called a difficult woman, But I thought, there's probably a different word I would use for her now, with the knowing that I have now, with the understanding. And so I just thought, sometimes the language, I started to realize the language wasn't enough to describe people.
Yeah.
That's what I discovered.
So I was curious to know, in your projects, what were some of the most difficult things that you found in in writing and researching and in putting together your projects?
Difficult?
Yeah, what was the most sort of challenging part about the process, and how did you get past that?
I was writing a memoir, so I was choosing, it's not a biography, so you don't write everything. You choose the memories that are telling the story, and I was trying to tell a story around gender. And I was nervous to write all of it because it's very personal. But the hardest thing was to write the stories that didn't make me look so smart. And the ones that I was like, because I assumed at some point my kids were going to read the book, which they haven't yet. But it was difficult to, talk about the relationships that had fallen apart or the places where I miscalculated. There were years when I was still thinking Penelope was a girl, and I wrote the story. In the beginning, I say she, which is really difficult because I know better, but I wanted the reader to come along with me. So that was hard to write, where, from a position of not knowing, like to show myself as ignorant. That was really hard, just because I didn't want Penelope to read it and cringe. Why is mommy saying she? But I really had to show the growth, the transition, not of my child, but of myself as a woman. And so I take you from like not knowing to knowing a little bit more. That was hard.
I think for architecture, in a way, as an architect, you have to know a lot of different things, but you're not yet an expert in any of those things. And I think entering into this profession and as a student, you have to learn about all sorts of different things, and a lot of that has to do with histories related to, let's say, technology, which are really, of course, when you go back and you look at the invention of some of these things, it is dominated by inventions by men primarily, and that history still has to be taught today because steel holds up buildings, right? And so, as a woman, it's hard to relate sometimes to that, and I definitely would have preferred other knowledge, or in addition, not to say I didn't want that knowledge. I think it's critical, it's fundamental, right, to how we live. We can't, you can't change gravity, right? So at least in that way. So, but to understand that when you're learning that history, you're not learning other histories, right? And so how can we open up even that kind of understanding and willingness to sort of seek out other ways to learn about building. And it's not just about some kind of structural engineering, but it's about policy and zoning and how cities have come about, that we inherit a kind of building fabric based on all of these things that have come before us. And it's a lot, it's a big burden to kind of take that on. And then I think also that we have, at least I would say in the US, have developed through a kind of grand narrative, and those narratives still continue, but there are other stories, there are other histories, and they may be at a smaller scale, but they're just as important, I think, in a way. And so on one hand, it produces then anxiety within the profession and discipline because we're not all on the same page. But I think that is something that as a collective we have to start to address and talk about. And
is architecture gendered? If you look at the bones of a structure that a man has created versus the bones of a structure that a woman has created, you see a fundamental, not the design elements, maybe that too, but the structure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it would be potentially a kind of case-by-case basis, I think, and that's really sort of what I'm more interested in after through the seminar that I've created. Let's say that you really start to go deeper into each project and understand, but ultimately I feel that each building is its own thing, has its own set of issues, and also architecture isn't just about a singular figure anymore. It really is a collective of people making a project or a building today. So,
is it language?
There's some of that for sure. Yeah.
I was just wondering because I'm thinking about how language changes over time. I'm just looking at my family from the turn of the century up to current day Brooklyn. So much of the language around gender has changed. I remember my dad used to say really words that I can't even get out, like faggot and sissy and bad words.
Right.
But at the dinner table, maybe, or at least in a television room.
Sure.
And so that language is
Yeah.
long gone now.
Right.
And my idea is that it should change drastically year by year.
Yeah, for sure.
Wondering if in architecture and in history, do you see languages shifting drastically?
I mean, definitely in journalism. We were talking about this earlier today, but I think that when I first joined the New York Times about 8 years ago, you really try to blend in and fit in. There's an old editor who would say that he always felt like he was brought to the New York Times by mistake. and I think everybody feels that way at some point. You just feel like you're so
it's
lucky.
so big.
It's just the upper echelon of newspaper organizations, and you're so lucky to be there. And so you try really hard to blend in and fit that kind of mold. Like, is my story Timesian enough? And I think that started to seep into me and my own work. And so one day I was writing a day-to-day obituary on a woman who had a YouTube channel for hairstyles for Black women using their natural hair for the natural hair movement, which was something I personally was not familiar with. I had heard about this woman when she died, and we were considering whether to do her obituary.
Madam C.J. Walker?
I don't. So my editors were kind of dismissive. She's not the sort of person we normally do an obit for. And I said, well, we should be trying to get more women and people of color in our pages. She had 1 million followers.
Oh, this is a current person.
Yeah. It was very recent, right? It was a day-to-day obit, not an overlooked. And so I really fought to have her obit written, and I even offered to write it, even though my role was an editor, not a writer. And so I wrote it, and one of the things that I put, which is in our style book, is that she was a believer in the so-called natural hair movement. And it's the word so-called. In our style book, it's just listed as a neutral term to describe a generic phrase that people use, But really it has like a sneer to it. And that's what people were saying on social media, and they said, oh, of course,
They nailed you for it.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I didn't mean that. And I really fought for her obit to get in the paper and to be able to tell her story. And so it was disappointing that I had disappointed the community about it. But
It was one of the Miss Jessie sisters. I'm like trying to figure out who this person was.
I think you're right.
It was. There were two sisters that formed a company called Miss Jessie's, and one committed suicide. Yeah, it was recent, and she was part of the initial, a very real movement, natural hair movement.
Right.
But yes, right. So, but I would think, so-called now is a jab, but I guess in its original form, it's just colloquial, right? Like showing that there's a language around it.
It's still in our style book. It hasn't changed, and there's so many terms about how we refer to different, races and just a multitude of things. Our style book is like thousands of pages long, referring to lots of different things that we follow for our articles.
I found that too, like with my I have a daughter who's 19, and I say things, and she's like, "Oh, that's just, it's so offensive, Mom," and I feel very uncomfortable with you in the room. And I'm trying my best, and I say things like, I would say, okay, one year I said, "Look, guys, it's New Year's Eve, and the only trans person we know is Penelope. That's just ridiculous. So this year we have to find new friends, make new friends, and they all have to be transgender." And my kids were like, "That's horribly incorrect. It's so politically wrong. It's uncomfortable that you would say that. I'm not, I don't like your language, Mom." And I said, "Well, I don't know how else to say it, but, and so language is not big enough. It's not nuanced enough. And sometimes it's not gentle enough. Even when we don't want, like you were disappointed with yourself, and when I go back and I say that out loud, I know how horrible, it sounds crazy, like they're not lost. We're not finding people, we're just broadening our, so I was trying to communicate something and I was stumbling, but my kids remind me all the time that language is constantly changing and needs to change.
Yeah, for sure.
Oftentimes it's a doorway actually for new thought, and just to take this one step further, my father-in-law was from Ghana, West Africa, and he is very traditional, very religious, and wasn't probably would not have understood Penelope as a trans boy, and probably wouldn't have allowed for that, and would not have interacted with him in the way that I'd want. And so he was coming to visit, and I asked, we thought about how to approach it, and we said, okay, we won't use the word transgender. We'll just take that whole part of the language out, and we won't talk about the body. And I asked him if he would please be so kind as to just change the language, just say he instead of she. And he said, sure. Because in my language of Twi, we don't use gender pronouns. So that's when I just an idea that language is flexible, can be, entry points for people to either totally F up and miscommunicate or, or come together with polarizing ideas.
I was kind of curious to know more about Penelope now. What's Penelope's day-to-day like?
Well, he eats transgender food and sleeps on transgender.
Because he found acceptance,
Yeah.
or he's pretty young.
He's 11. Well, so he was 3 at the time. He's 11 now, and he is in 8th grade. He's a straight A student. He was class president. He competes in karate. And the interesting thing is, when they're young, they match up boys and girls, and then they separate them. So he now fights against boys in the 11 to 13, so 13-year-old boys, right? And every year when Penelope is fighting against the boys, my heart and it challenges me to really question how deeply do I understand him to be who he is. And every year and he destroys them every year. He takes home gold medals and silver medals, and when he doesn't, he still just smashes on the mat. He's so good. So he's confident. He has issues, like when I talk about puberty, he gets choked up, nervous. It hasn't come yet, but we've got that whole thing to look forward to. And I don't have an answer to that. I try to bring some humor to it. I put these, does anyone know what Packers are? Yeah, we are a very cisnormative room here. So Packers are prosthetic penises that people can use for, I'm going totally left here, that people can use to create a bulge in their pants. And so it's something that I've learned about in the conversations that I take on, in the rooms that I go into. And I bought some and I put them on the dinner table. And my kids were like, what is that? I was like, they're penises, you know what they are. I'll give you $5 if you give me a description of the anatomy of penis. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And I said, they're also Packers. And we had a conversation around what many communities talk about, but my family had never talked about it, but it will be something that might come up in Penelope's life and therefore in our lives. And so a lot of what we need to start doing is just putting stuff on the table that has been, stories on the table, questions on the table, dead people on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note. I think there's a microphone going around, coming to you.
Hi, my name is Hala. I am a writer and a journalist at Syracuse. I had a question for anybody who feels moved to answer it. You all have talked about this initiative that you've taken in your own social and professional circles to change a narrative, but I'm wondering if in that process you ever feel alone in carrying that burden, and how do you manage that weight by yourself to tell stories that maybe other people aren't telling, and how do you know when to ask for help?
I definitely feel alone day to day on my desk because of the fact that I'm unique staff-wise. So that can be really a challenge. It's, I have to pick and choose when to speak up because I don't want to be a nag at the same time. So it's kind of finding a balance. But at the same time, I have so many supporters all throughout the New York Times building and readers. I get tons of emails. I sort of wish that my cohorts were a little bit more engaged in this so that I could involve them in it because it's really been great. So there's a sort of divide for me between those two worlds. But I think, yeah, just whenever I feel doubtful, I just look to all those people that this project has meant something to.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of echo that in a way too. I think part of sort of tracing some of these histories and looking to certain architects and their writings can be a kind of lonely process of sitting in the library, for instance. But ultimately, in being able to present that work, then to an audience, to students, to sitting at the design studio desk and having more knowledge to reference and exchange a conversation, which ultimately leads to then that coming back in forms of projects and design reviews where you invite people to come and sit and have a conversation is very enriching. So, yeah.
I thought writing was going to be like a solo process, and some of it is. Some of it is just, me and the pen. And that doesn't feel lonely, but it's definitely just me and myself and my thoughts. But I went back on, I watched a video by Maya Angelou, Dr. Maya Angelou, and she was giving the commencement speech at my graduation at Spelman. And I remembered it, and then I went back to it, and I watched it again, and it's so powerful, you have to Google it. She says that we have to never walk into a room alone. Never walk into any moment alone. Bring all of your people with you. So your auntie, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, bring them emotionally with you into the room or onto the paper or to the desk or to that interview that feels really, all eyes on you by yourself. Bring all of your people with you. And I took that in the process of writing. And so I was always thinking and stopping and pondering. Like, this story doesn't start with me, it doesn't even start with Penelope saying I am a boy. And I went way back and first I had to stop and read their letters and look at their pictures and imagine them, but then I brought them with me through the process. And that helped me because I didn't feel so much of the nervousness of getting it wrong, right? Of just like writing the wrong history, telling the wrong story, and I thought, bring all your people with you.
Can I just speak? Hi, my name is Jocelyn Costa Johnson. I'm a dancer from Harlem, a writer, anthropologist, and a filmmaker recently, and I grew up looking up to that beautiful woman in the middle. Watching your journey and the way that you've shared it with the world and the community has been incredibly inspiring because it's also come in conjunction with a movement that I feel is happening in, even just in popular culture. We've known about transgender for years, but now we have Pose, and now we have not just Laverne on Orange is the New Black, now we have Janet Mock, now we have a lot of people speaking about it more. And I feel like the title of your book, I don't know if this is a question or more of a devil's advocate, The Bold World. I feel like as a woman, I'm constantly reminding students and other people that we say sorry too much. That we're the first people to excuse ourselves, and that we generally want to glide into a room rather than explode into the room like it came, right? And I've been challenging that in my work because I'm documenting pioneers of color in the dance worlds, in the ballet and modern worlds that nobody knew about. That would have been amazing for me to know about when I was coming up. And instead of going slowly, I'm like, well, why can't we tip the balance a little bit more? And instead of maybe, again, devil's advocate, thinking 35% next year, why don't we go to 70%? Why don't we overcompensate for the lack that has been in architecture, in society, through language? And I kind of challenging all of the women who are doing this kind of work in this room today to think about that, because that's how I'm thinking about it. Like, we are at a kind of a revolutionary shift, I feel, in so many ways, and I want to feel that boldness more.
So the question sort of is, how can we explode?
Yeah, how can we explode? Like, I felt like you've exploded and you've been surrounded by the popular culture that has embraced you, and that's been so inspiring. And, going into schools with my daughter, who got some of Penelope's clothes, who's 8 now, and I've never seen gender-neutral bathrooms at Brooklyn Friends. I was like, oh, it's happening. And I was like, Julie did that, yes. And maybe that was what you were feeling in terms of what was going on, but I feel like this, gentle lady thing that we've been doing, and I kind of hope, and, maybe we can call ourselves this, and maybe, I just feel like, what can we do collectively to make it more of a movement, because we don't have that much time.
Specifically on I think I think I know what you're saying, right? A lot of times I was feeling like people were asking me to go slow. My family was saying, can you slow down? Can you not even use the word transgender? We don't even know yet. What if Penelope, is a tomboy? Or what if that word is damaging or unsafe for Penelope? What if it puts Penelope at risk? Slow it down, Jody. And my statement was to slow down, to watch, and to not say anything is to support a system that is against my son. So I didn't have time to slow down. That did, my marriage is not. We're not together in a marriage anymore. So there is fallout, and so if we want to be we have a job to keep. That was a fallout that I was willing to take because I was looking at the life or death of a kid. But when we're looking at our careers, and I don't know, explosively building structure. There's certain things that we need the internal structures to stay. And there's certain places where we want to just destroy that structure. And so that is the question really, like, in what places can we destroy the structure? And in what places do we hold on to some of the tradition? It's a difficult place to be when we have to ask those questions. But I think that's what a lot of great leaders have asked. When does tradition serve us, and when does something not serve us? And as soon as we realize it doesn't serve us, it's gone.
Okay, so my question is for the panel, for all of you. And my question is, do you feel the issue with women in the workplace is more about women or working mothers? The fear that if you hire a woman that she will have a child and that she will have to take off, which will affect her ability to be a high performer. So when you mentioned that they said that those women weren't, or those people of color or women were invited to the table, is that one of the things? And in the architecture world, most companies or big companies won't hire a woman because they fear that if she gets married, she'll have children. And you mentioned the jobs that you had and the careers that you had that led to that. So my question is it more so an attack on women or more so an attack on a woman's ability or want to be a mother?
Yeah, that sort of came up very recently when we were looking at our day-to-day list of people who had died, and of course, as usual, there's like 25 men and 2 women, and one of them, I had looked into her to see if she was worthy of an obit. She was a designer. Her last name is Compson. I'm so bad at names.
Can't help you on this one.
But her parents were designers, and she quit school when she was 16 and started working with them, and then decided to start her own firm. She was very successful in the 90s with sort of like rock and roll style clothing that was Paris inspired, but then she had 2 children, and so she decided to slow it down, and I read a couple of interviews where she said that. And so then she dabbled in all kinds of other things like interior design, cosmetics specifically for teenage girls. And so I went to pitch this in the meeting, and I said, so she was, she was successful in the 90s, and after that she sort of fell off, but it's because she was dabbling in all these other things. I don't think she got a chance to really make her name for herself in any one area. And they said, okay, yeah, so we should skip her. And I'm like, well, really, I mean, she had 2 children, she had to take a step back. Like, I think that's an important part of her story. And so when I return to New York, I hope to still continue pushing for an obit for her, but that is something that I consider for sure, and I'm positive that that is why some of these women don't make it to our list or to our obituary pages, is because their lives were interrupted for something equally great, but not for getting you an obituary in the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, I think in architecture, it's very complicated. It's a profession that demands a lot of hours, and particularly depending upon what kinds of projects you might work on. Clients often ask for things without much notice. They expect to have it right away, and it's difficult to be a parent and to have a practice. I think that's for many professions, but at the same time, architecture through history has represented women always in a way that is about their biography as part of their history up front. And on one hand, it's very valuable to know what these women have gone through to be able to become an architect. But at the same time, I think it also undermines our work in that we don't actually then get to talk about the work without talking about the personal. So it's, you know, it's complex and it's challenging. For sure. And it's not just about, you know, sort of getting pregnant and having a baby. It's through the whole duration of, you know, raising a child or more than one child and being there for their education is my kind of personal experience at the moment. But anyways, yeah.
I think it's an attack on women. I mean, I think it is a attack on the female body, what the body does, what the female body does. I mean, I've never stayed at a job long enough for them to, I leave usually first. I come in, I work really hard, I enjoy it, and then I leave. I've stayed at jobs sometimes a year and I've left. And I've had children, 4 birthed, 1 adopted. And so I'm sure, and one job I was sort of pushed out because I was pregnant and they thought, you know, it was gonna be a liability. But what I have experience with though is talking to people about why women are not valued in the job with children or while pregnant. And so many things, I've heard the weirdest things like that, I mean, really crude things about when a woman is bleeding, she should just be far, far away from men. I've heard that it, you know, that it is distracting, that they, you know, a pregnant woman can't think and a pregnant woman can't do. It's when I was the most creative. We're literally creating, and I'm creating, right? And so I've been the most creative pregnant. But yeah, there's an attack on the female body. There's an attack, a belittling of what we actually do. We are architecturally thinking as mothers, as creators. It's like not one, you know, so what we do in home and in body is what needs to happen in companies and in society and in the government. It really is, instead of thinking like this, right? And that's what women do and mothers do. And so I would love to see us return to a more female-centered way of living. We've done this other way of living for a long, it's not working. This is not working. And so if we could go back to, if we could value the female body, the female way of, and I know it's this, of all the gender talk now, I'm saying the female way of thinking, but I guess certain humans have a way of thinking that is architectural, like city planning, and I've seen that a lot with women and mothers, and I'd like to have that valued in the office and in society in general.
We have to, unfortunately, I would love to have your question, but we are going to continue this conversation downstairs. Can you all give these ladies a hand?